Welcome everybody to this week's Humpday Hangout. I am Terry McGrath, Assistant Chief, Louisville Fire Department, and this is our monthly Humpday Hangout for Chief Lasky and myself. Chief Lasky is out spreading the good word. I think he's out on the West Coast. I think he's got an extended tour out there, so we're waiting to see what kind of shape he's in when he comes back. I don't know if he'll change his wardrobe or hairdo, or he'll come back more relaxed and chill, but he's out there teaching the up and coming members of the fire service and spreading that good word. And so we wish him well, and he'll be back with us next month. So if you have, before we get started, if you have any questions for us today, the easiest way to get those to us is via Twitter, and you can post those on Twitter if you use the hashtag FETalk on Twitter, and we'll get those questions, and we can certainly work those into the show. Just as another note of importance to anyone in the fire service, FDIC April 8th through the 13th, 2019. You can visit FDIC.com and get your information there, get yourself registered. Greatest training event in the world. And I've never had anyone ever say that they went to FDIC and didn't get more than their money's worth at that training experience. April 8th through the 13th, FDIC.com. Today we're hanging out with some really good friends and some pretty special people to me. Most of them I've known for quite a while, and I know that Chief Lasky is going to be a little bit disappointed because this is certainly a show he would like to be a part of. But we've got Chief Les Stevens from the San Marcos Fire Department. I've got Chief Mark Lee from the Garland Fire Department, and our senior member, retired Chief Steve Bass from Grapevine Fire Department. Earlier, while we were getting ready for the show, Les referred to him as Yoda, and I found that very disrespectful. And but fortunately, I could hide my camera as I laughed. But anyway, good to see you, Chief Bass, and of course Bobby Halton's joined us as well. So we look forward to a good hour. And so what we're going to talk about today is the word tradition, what it means, what the different variants of it, and the times that we're hearing it, and what's the importance of it, and when's it okay to get away from it, and when's it what are the things we should be hanging on to, and so this topic was kind of brought up between a discussion that Les put out there, and he brought it to me, and I thought it was worth talking about today because I certainly hear that word quite a bit around Louisville, and I know it's something that's a passion of Chief Lasky's as well. So that's what we're going to talk about today, and we can jump right into it. So I hear the word tradition a lot when we're doing new candidate interviews. And it's funny because when they bring it up, I always stop and ask them, what does it mean? Because we'll get the phrase like, well, I came to Louisville because you guys are traditional. So I'll say to them, what does it mean? And it's interesting that not many of them are able to offer any substance as to why they use the word or why they associate that with the Louisville Fire Department. I have a feeling some of it may be that they've read Chief Lasky's book and they know that it's something that's talked about in a lot of things we do, but to turn around and actually cite examples as to why they would associate Louisville with being a traditional department. So I always find that kind of interesting. I guess sometimes I'd like to hear that candidate sit there and talk about maybe some of the ceremonies, talk about some of the things that we focus on here, which is customer service and family and things of that nature. But I guess I'll throw this out there to Les, and this was something that you had kind of brought up, and I guess where the idea came from, and what you hear down in San Marcos regarding tradition.
All right. Thanks for the opportunity to join you today. I appreciate that. This came about, we were looking for some topics, and I made a quick post on Facebook asking guys what they wanted to talk about. And this was one that was put up by a couple of different, and I think they know it's a hot topic issue. And I think you alluded to it a little bit. I think there are some traditions that we do a good job with, some ceremonies and stuff. But I think also the undertone that I took away from the individuals that put this topic out there for us was perhaps some of those traditions are things we need to discontinue. And I think, if you go back far enough, and there's people on here that can speak back, long time before I joined the fire service, but there were things that were done, initiations and hazing and stuff that in today's world, those wouldn't be tolerated. So I think we've got to look at each of those things individually. We've got to look at them critically. We've got to look at whether or not we're being responsible with the taxpayers' money as we carry on those traditions, or are we just doing it because, like we joked about before, we've always done it that way. And so I'm really excited today to hear the other perspectives, but that, I think, is why this was put on here, is I think all of us hear that word a lot, and no one's really necessarily nailed it down to exactly what it means. And are they saying it as a positive thing, or are they saying that with a little bit of a negative connotation?
Hey, so we were talking before the show, and I was kind of referring to Chief Bass. I think he's probably one of the more tenured people on this panel. But Chief Bass, you started in Dallas.
Panel or planet?
You started in Dallas. How many years you been in the fire service?
Well, I've been in the fire service 48. I worked, or when I retired, I'd been in the fire service 48. I've been retired now for 4 years, but I actually worked as a volunteer and then a career firefighter for 6 years in Hurst, a small town in Terry County, prior to going to Dallas. I was in Dallas 27 years. Went there in 1972.
So we were talking before the show, because I grew up or spent, I don't know, the first 7-8 years of my life. But as a kid, I remember I lived by Fretz Park, which was in Dallas. It was right down the street from Station 56. But I can remember as a child, and at that time I wasn't, I didn't have any idea. I didn't tell my parents I was going to be a firefighter or anything like that. I just spent a lot of time at Fretz Park. That's where the station was located. So, but one of my memories back then was that station was kind of part of our lives. You were always welcome to stop by there. They would come out if they were out doing something, interacting or washing a rig or something, but they would come out if you were at a soccer game or something. And so obviously the station location had a lot to do with the interaction, but that's kind of one of the things that I think about, I guess, when I think of the fire service right now, is that what maybe we've seen, and there may be a number of reasons for it, that the fire station or firefighters in some areas don't seem to integrate with the community or involve themselves with the community. So what do you think, and obviously your career brought you out of Dallas, and you most recently retired from Grapevine, but the way things were, let's say in the late 70s compared to what you saw in the fire service now?
Well, one of the things you mentioned is very prominent in my mind and in my thoughts on tradition, and that is the firefighters being outside of the fire stations. Back in the 70s and even back into the 60s when I was in the other department, it was a very common, and in fact it's almost ritual, and I will call it a tradition, that we would sit in the evening outside of the fire station. We had benches in front of the stations. We were, I think, we were not necessarily there, in all honesty, to welcome the community. That wasn't our purpose. Our purpose was fellowship. Our purpose was to sit out and enjoy the weather or whatever may be going on at the time. But it certainly lended itself to us interacting with children that came by, with motorists that stopped by, with people seeing the fire station. They're seeing people, and I think they made a human connection. And it's not just an issue of, wow, there's a big red fire truck and but rather there are people, and this is a people versus people, or people helping people kind of environment. And it led to a great deal of community interaction, both neighborhood wise and some that would be lost, or some that would just stop in for some assistance, and frequently just stop in to say hello. And even in that time, thank you very much for what you're doing. So that's in the late 70s. That is where I put a lot of that effort, community service, and what it lended itself to. Fixing bicycles for kids, the things like you talk about, of just going and visiting and seeing the men and later on the men and women. And I think that is a critical part of our connection to the community and to the people that we serve.
Mark, you took over for the city of Garland, which was a sizable jump for you from where you were working. And Murphy was one station. Is that you have two or one?
It was one.
Okay, so Mark, in the interest of full disclosure, so Mark retired from Louisville and then moved on and was a chief in Murphy. But then you recently moved to Garland, so a sizable jump in the size of a department. Obviously, it's easier for one station. Your office is probably in that station, and so you're deeply integrated and a part of probably a station that's very incorporated into the community. But now you move to a bigger department, and so you've got staff, you've got administration building, so you separated yourself from that. But how do you as a fire chief today, how can you kind of hold on to some of what we're just talking about and making sure that your department, especially when it's the size of and as busy as Garland is, how do you keep that rolling?
You know, Terry, it's interesting. I got over here to Garland and they're doing some phenomenal stuff. There's some things that we're adding to, but making that jump was pretty easy because it's an older department. There's a lot of things going on here. The community involvement. I'm amazed when I'm scrolling through a Facebook or something like that, and I see the guys have done. You know, we all see it. Stopping and mowing the yard for somebody. Stopping by and helping, you know, as Chief Bass said, somebody's broke down on the bicycle or somebody's got a flat tire. These guys just stop and do it. They never say a word about it. It's just part of the culture here is to be involved in the community. And they're knocking it out of the park every freaking day. It's awesome.
Bobby, we were talking when you got on here a little bit ago and kind of talking about the dreaded word of tradition and well, I say dreaded, it's dreaded for some, but you know, for others. And I think what we're basically trying to do here today is I guess in some regards figure out we're not going to keep every tradition, right? So the obvious choices of moving with technology and vehicles and you know, we just simply don't do things. And there are traditional things that used to be done that are just, we've realized are not safe. And so we're changing, whether that's tactics or equipment, but there's a fine line, I guess, of and it's the word change, I guess. We use tradition. Maybe that's an easier way. You say change, people's walls go up. But if we say, you know, tradition. But you've been at this a long time, Bobby, too, and had the luxury of traveling all over the country and seeing a lot of great organizations, but probably seeing the full gamut of what people have been able to hold on to or incorporate or bring in or mentor newer firefighters into this wonderful career and how you kind of tread on this hallowed ground.
Well, that's a great set of closing words because, okay, I think we need to, like in many instances in a conversation, define what you mean by tradition. And tradition has got absolutely zero to do with tactics. Tradition has absolutely zero to do with tactics. Tactics evolve continuously due to advances in technology, changes in personnel, demographics. Tactics are what tactics are. They're in context to the threat, right? So tactics are a constant evolutionary process. Traditions are a whole nother deal. And just for reference, you know me, I always go back to books, because unfortunately that's a tradition in Western civilization, is to codify things in what are called books. And these are two books about the traditions and customs and courtesies of the United States Navy. We are basically, the one thing about us and all the other branches is interesting, a lot of commonality, but every member of the Navy is a firefighter first. Fascinating. A lot of our uniforms, Navy, our ranks, Navy. So our traditions are linked to the Navy's customs and courtesies. And our traditions have nothing to do with the evolution of tactics. And also what gets meshed up with all of that in the process is normative behavior. What are people doing? What's the environment in a particular area of the country or organization? That is also not tradition. It might be what they're doing at the time, but I think you have to be really careful about how you define stuff, right? Like, we've never had a tradition of using rotary saws on pitched roofs, although I did it in my department for years and years and years. Ventilating roofs was not a tradition, it was a tactic. They're two separate and distinct things. A tradition was our pinning ceremonies, a tradition was how we dealt with funerals. A tradition was how we dealt with promotions. A tradition was how we dealt with the passing of a member. That's where our traditions came in. And inside of those traditions, we tried to express our reverence for the principles of what brought us together. If I could for a moment quote to you where just out of this wonderful book from the United States Navy on basically customs and traditions, they talk about, wrong book. Let me get the other book. Old guy, should have looked at the cover first. But here's a fascinating idea of what tradition is, and its best usage. And it's the handing down of opinions, practices, rights, customs from one generation to another by oral communication without written memorials. Now that is the old Latin definition, right? Which is pretty interesting because we have written them down, obviously, in this book, right? And the secondary deal is the accumulated experience to advance the achievement of the past, which I thought was fascinating as they talk about it. And so it said the elements to establish the following as a valid military custom are: it must be long and continued, it must be certain and uniform, it must be compulsory, it must be consistent, it must be general, it must be known, and it must not be in oppositions with the terms and provision of a statute or lawful regulation or order. So when we talk about those things, for me, we're talking about a different category of what I call the environment of an organization, right? Or the behavior of an organization. And I separate those things out specifically because I think posting the colors is a tradition. I think, a mast ceremony is a tradition. I think a housing ceremony, I'm participating in a housing ceremony tomorrow in Tulsa. That's a tradition. We have an invocation. We spend time talking about the past. We respect the old weapon, the old engine, and we replace it with a new engine. And so we honor that past vehicle's capabilities and its service and what it did for the community. And at the same time, we hope that the new vehicle we're bringing in through this traditional ceremony is graced by Providence with that same opportunity to save lives and property and be a symbol of righteousness and safety and community fabric and goodness. I don't think there's anything traditional about attack profiles. I think they change. I think they change based on buildings and manpower and all kinds of crazy issues. Not good or bad or right or wrong. They just do. And so I'm a real stickler for words, which is probably a good thing because I'm an editor, but I think words matter. And I think if we define traditions as those things that bring us together as a culture, that allow us to celebrate the things that we value and honor, then I think we're on a better footing than we just talk about. Hazing is against the law. Hazing is against our cultural values. So although it might be commonplace in an organization, it's certainly not a tradition. Because there's nothing honored about it. In other words, and I don't mean good-natured like we were doing earlier, Steve and I giving each other a hard time. That's not hazing. Hazing is when you willfully denigrate someone in order to denigrate them and make fun of them or abuse them or disabuse them. That's bad. when we make fun, you know, I've got more hair than Steve, which is obviously because I'm a better person, but that's just giving each other a hard time. And we both laugh and enjoy it. And we should do that to each other, because that builds that. The most important element of what we have is exactly what these hangouts are about. 5 old friends sitting around musing. And there's nothing more beautiful, powerful, or meaningful in this life than that friendship that we have, other than our relationship with God and our families. It's probably close to third place in the hierarchy of the dominance values of our society, of our culture. And so if you think about it, you know, in desperate times, you get ill, or death of a loved one, or something chaotic happens in your life. First thing you do is you pick up the phone and you call a friend like Steve, or Ricky, or Terry, or Mark, or Les, and you say, hey, you got a minute for me? And they always have that minute. They always have it. And that, my friends, I would call a tradition, is that when you join, you're truly joining a fraternity, an organization, a brotherhood, whatever you want to call it, whatever works for you, that has transcendent characteristics and principles and values beyond going to work and how we do our work. And that's not to diminish the work. Sorry, long answer, short question, but.
No, appreciate that. And so while you were opening the book, I was trying to Google it, but see, this is the whole problem we're facing here today.
I'll put it. It's a very old book, and it's the 5th edition of the Naval Ceremonies, Customs, and Traditions. It's a wonderful book, and then the other one is just basic service etiquette. It covers all the branches, and I've got several more. I've got a whole shelf dedicated. These are 2 of my favorites. How we post our colors, and how we carry a casket, and the battle rattle flag on our shoulders, and where the flag sits on the stage, and all of that has been thought out by our military brothers and sisters for how they would like to do it at their events. I think every organization in the fire service needs to do, not probably as in-depth a treatment of it, but certainly locally, you should have a treatment of it, so that when you have an event that requires that you do something with a certain amount of pomp and circumstance and decorum, that you do it correctly. And then that becomes your tradition, whether it's the, you know, and there's certain flag etiquette things you have to follow and such, which are codified by the flag folks. But other than that, you have great leeway, right? Like, where do you want to hold the ceremony? On the fantail of the floor, or do you want to hold it in a particular facility of the building? Where do you want to do the initial, you know, appointment day? Where do you want to do the swearing in? All of that stuff has, to me, and maybe it's just because I'm old, not as old as Steve, but I'm old. And he grunts. Yeah.
You people are.
Hey. So I don't know. I love that stuff. I can't get enough of it. When we post the colors at FDIC, when we play Amazing Grace, when people understand flag etiquette, and the covered firefighters are there saluting, and the veterans are, to me, it invokes in me a sense of purpose. It invokes a sense of me of connectedness. It reminds me of what we're really about, beyond all the silly bickering and nonsense and blah, 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 you know, smooth versus straight, you know, tastes great, less filling. Who cares? You know, when it really boils down to it, those are conversations we should have. Important conversations, very important conversations. But the really important conversations, they happen when one of us needs one of the others, or when somebody picks up the phone and says, she's not breathing.
So I sit here and I think to myself, because I always relate everything back to what, you know, how I respond in the position that I have in this fire department. So I guess I sit here and I think to myself, I know the obvious answer. If I was to say, okay, whose responsibility is this to make sure that, we're in the midst of hiring a ton of very intelligent, bright, energetic, passionate people, and we want to teach them the right things. And we do spend the correct amount of time teaching them, our skills and our tactics, the things that are obviously incredibly important for them to carry out the job. But what we don't do as an organization is all the things that you just listed, Bobby, is we don't take the time. And I'll pose this to Mark first, because I know you guys run academies in Garland, right, Mark? So is that a part of your academy? I listened to, I think it was a podcast or the radio show, I think, that Chief Lasky had done, and he had Glenn Corbett on there. And I think the overall topic of it was kind of history. And of course, I sat there most of the time almost ashamed at the fact of how much stuff I was learning. And I'm, 25 years into my career and had no idea of what they were presenting. Some of that is because at 22, I didn't care. And at 22, when Mark was my captain, and for the record, should have fired me several times. But when I was there, no way was I going to sit around and listen to somebody tell me about the history of something or the formality of something, right? Because I was there to be a fireman, and I wanted to go do the fun stuff and the things that they hired on to do. I am older now, and I have a whole different perspective of what this career and this job entails, and so I'm a lot more interested in it. What's the best way to approach that and to make that message go from the 52-year-old guy down to the 22-year-old guy?
Terry, it's funny. We got an academy class going right now. Yesterday afternoon, I dropped in on them about 3:30 and sat down in a chair and looked around the room, and we talked about the flag. Chief Halton just talked about flag and procedure and where should it be, how should it be, and so I sat down and asked them, "Where's your class flag?" Because they all have their own class flag, and this is class, 52, I believe, and They told me where their flag was. I said, well, why is it there? And they told me why they put it there. And then we talked about the U.S. flag and how patriotic firefighters are and why. And then I took it a step further. There's a long-standing tradition here in Garland that talk about involvement in the community. We do a toy drive. And that toy drive we set up in the theater training room that is this huge, huge, beautiful room. And so far this year is a horrible year for collecting toys, but we still have provided Christmas for over 300 kids this year. And so I sat down in that room and I told them, hey, there's a guy across the hall over there, and he's an off-duty fireman that has managed this program for us. I said, go over there and just talk to him, visit with him. Why does he do this? Find out about it. And what does it mean to the community for us to do this? And how do we decide who gets, who doesn't get? And then last weekend, Sunday morning, the association invited me to come participate in a shopping spree where we took 93 kids, something like that, gave them $125 each and took them shopping in Walmart and made sure they get the things that they need, but also made sure they get the things that they want and make sure that they have a Christmas this year. And I talked to these rookies about that, and I told them that the fire service is the fabric of the community, as Bobby referenced a while ago. And the only way that survives is through them. And that they have to listen to the old guys around here to learn what it is to be a firefighter, what it is to be a Garland firefighter. And then they have to teach it to the next class, which will teach it to the next class. And I think that's the stuff that Chief Halton's alluding to, that we got to pass on and make sure it doesn't die out.
And just to dovetail onto what Mark just said, and I take credit for a lot of brilliant men and women who have had the blessing to be able to read, and most of the words I speak are words that I've read and learned, like everybody else. But listen to this, to your point, Mark. This is from Admiral Lord Jarvis, and he said, a worthy member of the armed forces has pride in uniform, pride in service, and pride in his respect for the flag, which I thought was exactly to your point. And then this is one of my favorite lines of all time. And we don't know who ever coined it, but the highest praise that could be ever paid to an officer, an enlisted man, and let me add firefighter, at his retirement or death is that he lived and worked according to the best traditions of the service.
You know, I'll be honest with you, Bobby. It would take me 3 days to find the appropriate quote to, and you kill me every time you do this, because it's like I could Google this. I can't find this as fast as you could turn around, grab a book off of your shelf, and shame me. So, hey,
but you got to remember, Terry, I read for a living.
Hey, Les, I pose that same question to you. So how do you as the fire chief in San Marcos, where do you find the balance? Who takes charge in making sure that the right message is communicated forward?
I think in this case, I inherited a department that made it known when they were hiring a fire chief that they wanted to embrace some of those traditions, and that they had, were aware that they had gotten away from them. They weren't doing the apparatus pushing in ceremonies, hadn't opened any new stations to really do a traditional, uncoupling of the hose or that kind of thing. We didn't put a lot of emphasis on the pinning and the promotions. And what that did was prompted me. I'd come from an organization, honestly, I worked where Mark is now. And we weren't doing a lot of those things. And I know Mark has set about to change that. And I think in this case, it starts at the top. And part of that starting is just letting it be known that you're open to those things. You'll make time for a half a day, if that's what it takes, to do a traditional, opening of a station, complete with the uncoupling, the mementos that we give out to the elected officials, to the members who are on the design committee, those kind of things. I think all of those are part of that tradition. And I've watched, over the last couple of years, Chief Lee's doing those things in Garland. And I know they weren't being done there before. So I think that starts at the top. One of the things that we did that I thought was really neat when we designed our most recent station, and we copied a lot of stuff from other people. One of the things we copied right down to the exact number was the brick from your Louisville Fire Station number 7. But the stations don't look alike. Our guys wanted to use the architecture and the elevation of the front of a station that was built here in San Marcos in 1915. And we gave the architect pictures of that station and challenged him to incorporate some of those elements into our new facility. And it's a prototype facility that we're going to build, now several times over. So I think it starts at the top, as a lot of things do, but you don't have the burden of doing it. You just have to encourage it. You've got to foster it, and you've got to let it be known that you're open to those things.
If I can interrupt here also. First of all, Bobby, I want to thank you very much for reading that script I'd given you verbatim. And you did well. You did well for a guy. Reading is excellent. But I do want to say that, at last referring basically to what you were saying in the question that Terry asked you, and where does that begin? It does have to begin at the top, and it has to begin by example, and it has to be, it truly has to be manifest in who you are and who the top is. However, I think that for it to truly become a tradition that a department maintains, a tradition that they hold as sacred even, it has to be ingrained into the culture of the organization. And that doesn't come from the top necessarily. It's not maintained at the top. It's maintained in the very heart of those that are the organization. And when it's the senior men and women, when it's the company officers, when it's the firefighters that are saying, this is what we do, and this is where we go, and hey, we need to incorporate the look of our previous fire stations or whatever it may be. That is, to me, where it gains the most momentum and continues with the longest continuum within any organization. And that becomes the cultural fabric. Truly, it begins at the top. Top has to embrace and endorse, but hopefully that's only initially. I think, referring back to Bobby perhaps, and he is far greater expert and knowledgeable than I in old stuff. And I don't know that the brass of the Navy is necessarily commanding that each one of these traditions and each one of these ceremonies be conducted, but rather it's just understood. This is who we are. This is what we do. And it's in the very fabric and core of the men and women that make up the United States Navy and have occasion to be a part of our leading or those kinds of ceremonies. So you're correct, Les, but I think it's so important that we recognize that the core competencies almost of an organization have to be revolving and understanding. And who is best to do that? I think the senior people within the department to hand down and to pass on, to live and to example, is where truly those types of things will find their longevity and their place within any organization.
You know, and Steve, if I could add, Terry, for a moment, one of the ceremonies that I find so beneficial that I think the fire service could embrace more readily, and I think would be really helpful, are what's called a hail and farewell ceremony, where the outgoing officer, you know, you could start with the chief, but the outgoing officer comes forward, says goodbye to the troops. The incoming officer assumes command, and they say goodbye, and then the new guy addresses, or the new gal addresses, and the old officer leaves through the backstage. It sets a point of demarcation, right? That it's ended. So all the bitterness and griping and sniping can end. There's a beginning and an end. It's very, very important. The other thing that happens the night before, generally speaking, is that you have a dinner, if you will, for the senior staff or whatever the senior staff of that unit might be, whether it's the ops chief or the EMS chief or the chief of department, whoever it might be. It brings the cadre of those senior members from that group together, and there's always a master of ceremonies, and it's a roast, if you will, but it's a polite roast, and it's a presentation of gifts and all the rest of it. And then on the next day, it's a more formalized, if you will, farewell to the entire cadre under that individual's command or direction or whatever. And I find that oftentimes in the fire service, we allow the past to linger unnecessarily for whatever reason. And whether the gentleman did a wonderful job or whether the lady did an awful job, it's over. You know, letting go is tough for folks. But if you provide them that opportunity, it's almost like a funeral without having to die. You know what I mean? And if you think of a funeral, very few bad words are spoken about anybody at a funeral. You know what I mean? There's the old Irish joke about the priest visiting and saying, "Hey, anybody got a few words for Mike here? I don't know him. I'm just a visiting priest." And nobody stands up and he goes, "Gosh darn it, no one's going to be leaving this church until somebody says something decent about poor Michael here." And so finally a guy in the back stands up and says, "Well, his brother was worse." And he sits down. So, you know, it's so I think that's one of the things that, you know, traditions are what they are. They're ours when we adopt them, as Steve just said. And there's nothing stopping you from creating a new tradition. You know, when you move your family from one community to the next, there might be a festival of lights or a gathering at the river or something that folks do on Christmas that's just breathtakingly beautiful. In Albuquerque, it's walking the Luminaria. And if you live in Albuquerque or at any town in New Mexico, Luminaria are paper bags with candles in them. But when you see thousands of them surrounding homes and hundreds of thousands of them in a community, it's breathtaking. And so doing that gives you a sense of belonging to that community, of the holiday, of Christmas. It's just overwhelming. And so that was our tradition when we lived there. In Tulsa, it's a light festival, and wherever you go, you'll find something. So when you go into a service, you know, there should be those things that you want to go to, because they just speak to the better angels of our nature, and that's what a tradition is. It's not using the hearse tool to pop a door. That's not a tradition. That's a task. and albeit an important one. Hell, especially if I'm the guy stuck in the car. But don't get all traditional on me. If there's a better way to do it, hell, do that.
Terry, I want to real quick take credit for that. Steve Bass said, less is correct. And then everything that Bobby said followed that. So you're welcome.
Bad connection, Les. Bad connection.
You know, I got a text here from a young guy who had just tuned in, and he said, "Is that an AARP meeting or is it?"
Send me that address, please.
Well, it's important when you get to this age that you stay active. So every week we get you up, get you in front of the camera, and we'll do some calisthenics here in a minute.
Hey, I'll get on an elliptical head to head with you any day, son.
Oh,
Last man standing, bro. Let's go.
Yeah, that's going to be our next one. So next month, it's Bobby and Terry in the octagon on ellipticals.
There you go.
You said something there, Bobby, which was a nice segue, because one of the notes that I had made was create your own traditions and your own, special ceremonies or activities that you do. And, some of the things that I had written down that guys here have done, and not that they invented them or heard them. Chief, if you're interested in reading, about a lot of really special moments and a little bit of history and some education, that Chief Lasky's Pride and Ownership book is a great place to start. But, one of the things he mentioned in there, and a couple of guys have done it around here, which I really like, and that was at let's say 20 years of service. Chief mentions in his book, and I think it was in, an FDNY, at 20 years, a person has 20 years of service. They get together and throw that person a dinner, cook him dinner. And so, when you read something like that, wow, what a simple thing to do. And to be honest with you, 20 years in this line of work that's an accomplishment. But we don't stop, I think, to celebrate. And I said this on the show before. Every single time these guys roll out of the station, pull up in front of someplace, go and extinguish a mattress fire or cut a hole in the roof, whatever it is they do, we literally should be celebrating in the front yard when we complete it and no one's hurt and everything worked like it should. It's magical to watch. It's dangerous as hell, but we've come accustomed and I don't think we take the right amount of time to really understand the work, effort, time, and energy that goes into making it all happen. And I think that a lot about a firefighter's career at 20 years, at whatever level you are in a department. That is something we should celebrate, but we don't. Maybe I know that, if I'm hired with a group of 15 guys at 20 years, nowadays we send each other a text, hey, it was 20 years, we made it. And that's the celebration. But seriously, we that's something worth noting. And we will present them, the city will present them with their magical booklet of Weber grills and Bluetooth headphones to celebrate your milestone. But we as an organization, we hand you a certificate and say, thank you for doing 20 years. But we should work those in. That should be part of who we are at different levels, to say that, that is a milestone, and we should stop for a minute and celebrate those things. And I found that interesting in the book. And I know that some people around here have done things like, on Thanksgiving now, that instead of sitting at the station at Thanksgiving, eating Thanksgiving dinner with your family of 5, they've said, no, the families, let's get all the families up here. And I've come in on Thanksgiving before, and the apparatus is pulled out. It's tables from one end to the other, and there's 50 people in there eating, and it really is something special about that. And unfortunately, I don't think enough people do it. And so those are the little things I think that we should start doing.
I'll jump in. What you're talking about, though, seriously, is recognition, right? And Terry, that's so important. Anything we can do to recognize each other, especially before we're dead. You know what I mean? We all make a big deal out of making it to guys' funerals, which is just interesting. it's always nice to say something nice about somebody face to face. And you're right, Terry. My good friend Eric Roden calls it gush coin. We all like to be gushed over. So oftentimes when firefighters will go somewhere to speak, they speak for free because just payment enough and people saying, "Oh, that was really great. Thank you for doing that." That's all they're looking for, right? But Steve and I were just musing. When we came on, 20 years was probation, Terry. It wasn't.
Well, you'd be like Mark. You do what, 25 here, and then you're on, what's your second stint of 25? You ought to have this celebration stuff down.
I resemble those remarks, but I believe Chief Halton may have done several years in several places as well, and he's still on the job too. So, Terry, you talk about that in the city, and the city recognizes these guys at 5 years, 10, 15, 20, 25, 30, 35. I gave out a 40-year award the other day. It's something that started doing when I got here. Apparently these ribbons and stuff used to be delivered to the stations, through interdepartmental mail, and it was appreciated by the guys. I decided to make a point, and I suck at it, of doing it timely, but we keep those awards here in the admin building, and we take an afternoon, and me and the ops chief will make the rounds and go hand those out and shake the hand and just say, "Hey, thanks for your 5 years. Thanks for your 40 years. This is so freaking awesome. I can't imagine, the things that you've seen done and will see and do." And it does. It makes a difference. It does.
So it's some of and Bobby, you're right. We are talking about recognition and celebration, but I think I tie that into a tradition because I think it should be part of what we do internally. I think it should be part of what we do. Not to outdo you, Bobby, but I have books here on my desk as well. And so this book, and this is truly one of my favorite books. And if you've never read it, when it comes to marketing and when it comes to culture and when it comes to creating something special, so it's a book about Southwest Airlines. But when you read throughout that book, it consistently references family. And family as in the employees, but also the extended family. And there's they're honest when they say that there's an ulterior motive to bringing in the extended family, because if the employee has the support of the family, it makes them a better employee. And so certainly all that makes sense. But truly throughout that book, it talks repeatedly about, some of the things that we're referencing here today. One of the other things that Southwest does that I find it really, it's a fascinating place to take a tour of, but you go through their headquarters, their pilot training center. There literally is not a square foot of space that's not utilized for something. And they memorialize and take pictures and create history throughout the walls of their building. And it's a great place to walk through, so much so that they've been told that they actually have a warehouse. They have so much of this stuff. They have a warehouse, and they have employees in a department within that company. That's their job, is to rotate this stuff around and keep it fresh. But when you take the time to walk through there, for example, in the pilot training center, there's shadow boxes in there. There's a shadow box that is the uniform. I say uniform. I'm sorry. It was the clothing that a pilot was made to wear when he was shot down in Vietnam, when he was held hostage. That's up and it's on display. But the one thing, as you walk through and you look at things like that, and that's just one small example of what they display, but it really gives you an understanding of who you have within your organization. And I think that's something we lose today as well, is that getting back to the family thing, is that we have guys that work together for 2 or 3 years in a station. They spend a third of their lives together, and they don't know anything about each other. They don't take that time to whether it's today. I just got a text message a few hours ago. A guy was trying to rally up people to come to Station 2 and play dominoes this evening, which is dominoes is something I learned to play at the fire station. And it made me smile, because I can't tell you the last time that well, I don't get invited to anything. So he may not realize I was in that text string, but by God, I may show up there But anyway, I guess that's where I'm getting back to, and some of the traditions, the history, the fire service, the family make this what it is. My point when we opened the show about what I remember about Dallas Fire Department and Station 56 and how that was part of who we were. And those, when I talk about tradition, those are the things that are near and dear to me and that I want to make sure that this department holds on to. And that is, be good to each other. And these people out here, you shouldn't shut the door and grumble to get out of the chair when somebody shows up and says, hey, can my kid look at a fire truck or something like that. And I think those are the important things we should hang on to.
Absolutely, Terry. One of the things, Steve, go ahead.
Go ahead.
Okay. I was saying one of the things that our guys have done, and it was done as I discussed earlier, by the membership, and it was a select group of members that were involved in our recruit training program. At the end of the year, they had one individual that kind of stood out to them, and they created a program to give them a helmet, a leather helmet. As the department moved to everyone having a leather helmet, they've now gone back and regrouped and created a special helmet shield that they present to each of those guys. And it's kind of a little bit of an exclusive club. Not everybody that plays gets a ribbon. It's created by the members. They monitor it themselves. They've had a couple of years where they didn't give, or a class, where they didn't give out one of those shields or helmets. They've also had others where I think a couple of guys have measured up in their eyes to that. So I think that's a tradition, like Steve was talking about, that was created and is carried on by the membership. Another one I remember in McKinney, they had a program when you got off probation, you could start to carry your own maul. And it was a big deal because if you go there and you tour their stations, you'll see everybody in that department has their own maul, and they're all, for lack of a better word, decorated or adorned in different ways. And they kind of take some of their own personality and integrate those into that. But it's a big rite of passage in that organization for someone to come off probation and to start to have that. We've got a little bit of a tradition going here with our guys when a guy gets off probation, also presenting them with their own axe, which I think is really cool. And it's something that the membership collects money for, and they order, have it engraved or marked in some special way and present it with those guys. And I think that welcomes them to the family, but it also gives them something to be a part of 1 year later when they help carry that on to the next guy or girl that comes behind them.
I think that one of the things that we're all saying here, and I just want to make the point, is that at first I was kind of taken back a little bit by what you said, Bobby, and that traditions are not at all any of the tactical or the equipment or some of those things, and because in my mind I didn't totally make that connection, because I think some of the things that we did were more tradition than they were meaningful, beneficial, or even safe for that matter. But I think I've come a little bit full circle here, and that is, at the end of the day, at the end of each of our careers, we are not going to remember the type of hose line we used, the type of nozzle we used, how we popped the door, in your reference, what kind of clothes we wore, in all honesty. The things that are going to matter to us are the people. The things that are going to matter to us is going to be the camaraderie and the brotherhood and the rituals that we went through to develop those and to maintain those. And in Dallas, for example, for many years, and perhaps they still do, I don't know. But if a retired firefighter was in the hospital, and particularly if he was in somewhat of a critical or last stage sort of days, there was always a firefighter in dress uniform that was posted outside of his room. And that would go on for days, for weeks, as the case may be. Totally an issue of respect. Certainly there could be purpose in it in terms of assistance to the family, but in all honesty, it was an issue of respect, and that was day and night, 24 hours a day. And we were, our station is up to go and that kind of thing. But those are the things that develop the brotherhood and develop the love that we have for each other. And at the end of the day, at the end of one's career, and I can speak to that wholeheartedly now, it's not so many of these other things that we hold important. It is the people that we're involved in. Any way that we celebrate, any way that we grow closer together, any way that we share each other with each other, I think is the important, critical aspect of what we do and who we are as a service. Because with the exception perhaps of the military, there's very few careers, callings even, that people leave with that type of relationship and with those kinds of memories. It's just simply, I think, something that's very special with us and is truly the bond and the glue that makes the fire service what the fire service is today.
Wow, that's really, really well said. Les, did you hear that? He made a great point, and it was eloquent, and the words he used rolled right off his tongue.
It's amazing.
So we're gonna wrap things up here today, and I don't want to get out of here without giving each of you the opportunity to give us that one little pearl or word of wisdom, and for, I guess, at the end of the day, I think this truly is one of the best professions that anyone can get involved in, and I speak to that as a person who strayed away from the fire service and realized the error of my ways and came back. But when I think back of what, the memories, and this is all the stuff that Chief Bass that you just alluded to. I was just over in the kitchen this morning and I was laughing so hard at these guys telling stories, at someone's expense, but in a fun way, and not, certainly nothing they wouldn't have said to his face, but that is the fire service. There's we all know there's too much tragedy and misery out there, and that's what we deal in every day. And unfortunately, it's difficult and seems to be getting harder and harder each and every day. But it is the fire station that, we talk about the critical incident stress, and there's always a debate of whether you send people home. And I've always said, I never wanted to go home because my family and my comfort is right here, and I want to be with these guys. And that's what I think, to me, when I think of tradition, I guess I lump it all in that big kettle to say that's what the fire service is, and that's what's special to me. So I go back to Les. What's your departing thoughts here?
And the one thing that I would share with the people watching, I know at this group we do a pretty good job of it, but when we were thinking of people to invite on here today, we tend to think of the people that are currently serving, and I think we sometimes chop off our nose to spite our face. And it just clicked that I thought Steve would be a great ad, and somebody that did have a long tenure in the fire service, several different departments, contributed a lot, but also has a lot to share. And I think it's important that we continue to reach out to those guys and make them feel a part of this. I know I hear other guys when they retire, they're like, nobody ever calls me. They don't come by the station to visit. They don't call either, but nobody ever calls me. But like Steve said, they put in 35 or 40 years of their life here. And I don't think it's too much to ask to still be included. And so I appreciate the opportunity, Terry, to be a part of this today, but also to bring Steve and hear what he had to say on this topic as well.
Yep. Thank you for that. And appreciate that. Mark, what have you got for us?
Well, first thing, you said that I should have fired you years ago. You're wrong. You were a great guy to have on my crew, and I was honored to have you there. And you learned a lot under me, and actually I learned a lot working with you as well. So I appreciate that. I appreciate the opportunity to be here today as well. And, we talk about it starts at the top, but Chief Halton mentioned the word compulsory. My goal and desire in Garland is to bring some of these things, the traditions of the fire service, to us: the badge pinnings, the swearing ins, the push ins, the hose uncouplings, the flag. Bring these things here, introduce them, and my goal is when I leave, it will still be compulsory and they're still doing it. So that's what tradition hopefully will be in Garland.
Well, thanks for that, and I appreciate you holding those things that displaying some passion and making sure that those things stay first and foremost, and passing that message on. Chief Bass, what do you got for us?
Well, at the end of the day, as I said, it's all about people. It's all about each other. It's about what we do for each other. So in that vein, every day needs to be the tradition of getting better in what you do, getting better in how you do it, and how you take care of each other, and how you teach each other. Pass those things down, talk to each other, get out of the bedrooms, get out of the earphones off, and just be with each other, because that is probably the most critical tradition that we have to maintain. And there's no substitute for the people that you work with, far below and under and above. It's just take care of each other.
Yes, sir. Great message. Chief Halton.
Well, first, thank you, Terry, for letting me share the show with you again today. It's always a pleasure to see you, and thank you, Mark and Les and Steve, for joining with us and being here, as Steve so eloquently put it. It was beautiful. I will take a moment to ask, maybe Terry wouldn't mind speaking a little more to this, but I think one of the things we should do, especially this holiday season, as a tradition, is find a way to give back. And there are two things. Obviously, the Sons of the Flag, Andy Allison and Sons of the Flag are, Terry can speak to it better than I can, but the Sons of the Flag are a great group of men and women who are trying to help out Louisville firefighter Andy Allison. And I'm not going to divulge much more than that. Terry can speak to what we can speak to, but they're in need. One of our brother firefighters is in need, and you can go to Sons of the Flag and help out. Also, Ryan Appleman, who's a great firefighter. If you go to your Twitter account or whatever, you all know who Ryan is. There's a young baby named Caleb who was born to one of the firefighters down on Ryan's job. He was born in November, very, very early. He is going to require multiple surgeries that could potentially bankrupt another young firefighter's family, and they need our help. So, as we're talking about creating new traditions, especially in this Christmas season when we're celebrating the birth of Jesus, that we could sit back and say, wow, they're here. We're so blessed. We're so lucky. We've got so much to be grateful for. How can we help somebody and find somebody to help? And maybe that's a tradition that every house, every one of us could find and maybe do as a team. Say, hey, let's do this together, because maybe we're going to throw a big Christmas party, or maybe we're going to do something elaborate, or maybe we could take that fund or that kitty or just take what's left in the coffee fund this week and let's just send it to those folks, and just something like that. I don't know. Years ago, there was somebody who started a piggy bank thing where it was just take your piggy bank money and take it down to the kettles and drop them in, and it worked out phenomenally well for those people. Maybe we could do something like that. I don't know. But there's always somebody who has a struggle. And we talk so much about the tradition and the good times. Be careful to remember that when folks are going through a struggle, oftentimes their behavior can be off-putting and their presentation can be distressing, but that's the time when we need to rally around them the most. Jefferson once said a very interesting thing about free speech. He said, that which we find the most detestable and deplorable is what we should protect the most. Not because we agree with it, but because that's the foundation of that protection. So the foundation of the protection of our community as a community of firefighters is not so much when everything's going well for somebody or they're the number one person, but maybe it's when they're the person that's in the most trouble. So maybe find the folks that that are struggling the most and reach out, and then maybe that becomes a new tradition. So I don't know. But thank you. God bless you. Merry Christmas, and thank you for having me.
Yep. Thank you, Chief Halton, and very well said. And yeah, if anyone's interested, the Sons of the Flag does have a fundraising raffle that they've graciously decided to donate the proceeds of that to Andy. Andy was a firefighter here in Louisville, was electrocuted in 2012. Just some horrific injuries that he had to medically retire. It's been a struggle. He's a great guy. His dad retired from here as a career firefighter, and I love the guy to death. And anyway, we'd like to close that raffle out. So if anybody's so inclined, go visit Sons of the Flag, and you can get information there. Anyway, I appreciate all of you taking the time. This has been great. As always, I learned so much from these shows, and today was no exception to that. Our next show for Chief Lasky and I should be January the 16th, and that'll be in the year 2019. I can't even believe that that time is upon us again, and I think the older I get, the faster this is moving. So we hope you can join us then too. We always like to close things out and say that please keep all the men and women serving in the armed forces in your thoughts and prayers, and always remember that never forgetting means never forgetting. Thank you, and everyone be safe.